If you're a business owner or senior manager, you probably had more than enough about all the wonderful opportunities awaiting you in the era of digitalization.
Whether it is big data, cloud, data science, or whatever buzzword is currently trendy.
If you would like to hear someone dissecting these claims and showing you what it actually takes to improve business processes, you're in the right place.
This is Between Data and Risk, where we discuss real-life examples of what works and what doesn't in the world of business operations. Hello, I'm Artur Cognition Shared Solutions Chief Risk and Strategy Officer, and with me is my co-host, your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome to the 6th episode of Between Data and Risk, and today I wanted to talk about transverse risk management.
Transverse risk management.
Yeah.
Does it concern Are we going into political correctness area today?
No, we are. Anyone who has a better command of English, my co-host, would know that transverse means actually going across different areas. So an example of transverse risk or risk that's usually transverse, reputational. So you have very specific risks. If you consider your example company, you've got financial risks, you've got your health and safety, you've got your specific risk. Yes.
Is it like in financial institutions where you have siloed risks, where you have regulation which is containing trade risk in one bucket and it's like, vertical, and it has completely different risk team, completely different risk regulation and risk mitigants, and you have, exchange risk or whatever else?
Here I was trying to take it out of financial services because I don't want to be seen as the finance guy, and you're just dragging it back into financial services. Okay, fine. You've got the siloed risk management teams, and then you've got risks which are actually spanning across the different domains, and risks that are usually considered as transverse risk are reputational risk. Or climate risk, or in general, climate risk is just a subset of ESG, the environmental, social, and governance. The ESG being kind of a great acronym that's currently taking the whole domain by a storm. But really,
why is governance risk together with environmental and social? Is it like political risk?
It's a great question. If anyone knows the answer, by the way, let us know on contact at cognition.llc or podcast at cognition.llc. Just, why is governance bundled with it? Because ESG.
How understood is the governance in this term? Actually, let's stop here.
You've got environmental, which is everything connected with climate change, with pollution, or at least should be. You've got social, so anything that's connected with social change, the impact on communities, and governance is really kind of both internal, so how you actually manage your company, and in a wider sense, the kind of political risk impact of on again partly impact on communities. It's very distinct.
Like regulatory environment, regulatory changes.
Regulatory really goes outside of ESG. G here is meant more in the kind of enterprise governance and how it impacts, how your governance impacts the world, because it's all about the whole concept. The big concept between ESG is the impact that your company has on the world. How there are some voices out there, some articles about how reputational risk and ESG are not really risks. because the argument goes in those articles that they cannot be quantified properly, they cannot be managed properly. I have to say I don't really agree with those.
I recall a company. Actually, I can say the name because I'm going to say really good things about them. Where reputational risk was managed in such a way that everybody was informed. To imagine if you are making a decision, it was very. I like it because it's a risk which is very deeply connected to decisions. It's like if you make a decision and if you would see this decision being described in the press, do you think, would it be a good press for the company or a bad press? And they have a motto: do the right thing always. And which is very much connected with, always connects, like every decision that you make, think about the impact it might have. And in my opinion, it's the example of managing the reputational risk. Like if every employee is being told, think, you make any decision and you see it in the press, in what light it puts us.
What you say is very interesting. Although in that particular article, there was actually that was considered, and it was waved away as, oh, it's just training, which is what companies should do anyway. It's
just risk, which companies should do anyway.
But let's look at it a bit more specifically, reputational risk, because this is something that indeed, reputational risk it can be considered in every single action and decision within every company, right? I could make the same argument of operational risk. What is operational risk? Is the risk that your operation will go wrong. Where can it go wrong? Absolutely everywhere, right? Can you let's look at the second kind of argument. Can you measure reputational? It's tough. It's tough because you may not always know. Oh God, it's uncertainty. Maybe that's why it's risk. You're not always sure what reputational impacts your decisions might have, right? Can you specialize in reputational? Well, there you could probably, if you wanted to be a naysayer, you can say, oh, you just for every single decision, for every single action, you just mention what can go wrong. But that's pretty much what all risk managers are almost contracted to consider what can go wrong. But I know some really good reputational risk managers, and what they do, what they specialize is actually considering not so much what can go wrong, but in general terms, but actually thinking about very specific terms about, for example, clients. If you're a company, and not only a financial company, tech company, electronics company, if your company has clients in sector which may be considered not exactly acceptable socially, that is a reputational risk. I remember a great story once that even though it's connected with financial markets, the kind of the crux of it is non-financial. I was talking to a Dutch pension fund, and they were considering which investments. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, we don't want any kind of any companies in it in our investments which make cluster bombs. We don't want any companies which make weapons of mass destruction. But we are fine with this company which makes, and I don't remember the name of the company, but they said, we're fine with this company which makes handguns because they make handguns for the Dutch police. And I think they were managing their reputational risk in their own way, in a very specific. They knew their society, they knew their clients, they knew the press, and they said, we want very specific things. So this is actually reputational risk management.
Sounds about right. So uh, I have a question from the point of view of the CEO of the company. Let's say when you approach or you're already in a position where your reputation is your really strong asset. You have a brand. Uh, Other than hiring a risk manager, like how would you, if you being a chief risk officer for HSBC for so long, if you would go to another company and you would be given the freedom to choose how your company operates also in risk area, other than hiring a risk manager, how would you approach it from the perspective of the reputational risk?
As with any risk, the key, I think, is first to identify where it actually lies, because uh, it's it's one thing to say that rep- any action can impact your reputation. It's completely another thing to actually review your process and say, here we have very low reputational risk impact potential. If if a car company suddenly decides on using a slightly different shade of blue in their cars, uh, it it may have some potential impact, but will they be really, will the press come down on them like a ton of bricks?
If it would be a shade which is actually registered by another car manufacturer, and they would start to be perceived as copycats, I guess it could.
That then you caught me with my lack of knowledge about the automotive industry, because I didn't
There are
know that
colors.
there's.
There are colors and shades of colors which are legally protected, and there are some colors that cannot be used on any car. They only specific manufacturers can use them.
Okay, then you caught me. But assuming that they knew their field much better than some guy on a podcast, then they probably could choose a color which was not legally protected. But
But the
from the
reputational
point
risk
of
is
view,
there.
see, so what you just did is you demonstrated my point. There is certain knowledge that is required, and you could argue that in this case, because I'm kind of thinking about the arguments in that particular article, you could argue that this is the domain of legal, like that a lawyer should know that there are certain colors that are protected, so they're protecting the company, and it's really legal that they are managing here, and not reputational. That's it's an argument you could take. But I'm thinking here about, so if you cut out this legal risk and just think about, okay, you have the marketing department, they're thinking about two shades of blue, lawyers have signed off, none of them are protected. uh, is there really reputational risk between two shades of completely unprotected blue?
If I
Probably
can play,
low. I know you're trying to come up with.
yes, I do. Of course, if we would take two different shades of brown, I guess at least some of them would lead to some sort of reputational risk. Some of the why does I think it's Mitsubishi Pajero does not bear that name in the Spain?
And it's pronounced pajero. And as any Spanish speaking person would. Yes, and it is a risk that they had with the name, but this was
The,
actually going to be my counter example. You're again demonstrating my point. If you only let me finish my point, that selecting a name is probably a bigger risk, because you have to consider what it means in different languages, and
Absolutely.
it was. I in one of science fiction stories, I forget which one. There was actually a whole concept of a company which researched the potential names for companies just to check if it meant something in any language or had any connotations that could have an impact. So that process of thinking is the process of managing that risk.
That's why what I'm trying to say is that you can manage this risk. Like if you know what can damage your reputation, and purely reputation, like if you have a name which sounds a bit offensive in any language, what you are losing is your reputation as a reputable car producer. You start producing cars which are considered, let's say, not serious. It's a pure reputational risk, and it's manageable.
And again, you could dismiss it as that's really not a problem of reputational risk. That's a problem of marketing. It's this kind of labeling that it is a problem of marketing, but I'm sure that the marketing department should consider that. But it is an example of reputational risk. In terms of managing,
but the reputation is a function of marketing. Marketing is building the brand. Yes, of course, it is a marketing function. But the risk, like they are trying to establish some reputation for a brand. So it's like telling that, I don't know, financial.
Which is why I think the argument here is absolutely moot, because it's really discussing whether a reputational risk manager should be allowed to bear the noble title of a risk manager. I think that's we may call them when we talked in our episode about ego.
Move. Oh yeah,
and job titles. They may call themselves the grandmaster of company's reputation, and in that way they're not using the elevated title of risk manager.
I would like to move away from let's say a single point of view. I wanted to ask you, because you said that risk related to reputation cannot be modeled. What does it mean it cannot be modeled? Because to my understanding, there's a lot of computer power and a lot of smart mathematicians spending their time trying to calculate risks related to financial transactions and all this magic which happens behind the doors of the global banks. I can imagine immediately at least a couple of scenarios where the reputation risk could be modeled as well. Like if you are going to offend, you have a risk of offending, I don't know, people who are very conservative, because you would invest into some industry which is not maybe very conservative in its nature. I don't know, sex toys. You can calculate like you can do a research, check what is your current percentage of users who are strongly inclined to follow some conservative rules. What is the market that you could reach with your new line of product, and it's modelable. Like I find it hard to accept that reputational risk is impossible to model. Like if you can spend, I don't know, petaflops on calculating financial risk, you can spare gigaflop on calculating market data, and couple of scenarios. Okay, what is the percentage of people who will start thinking about us badly enough to choose the competition?
One thing I just wanted to point out that all I said is that some people say that it's not possible to measure reputational risk. And I think it is possible to measure it, even though it's hard. I didn't say it was easy, hard. It's much harder to measure than most risk, because it's very soft in its nature, and it is absolutely modelable, because any concept that has data behind it is modelable. The question is more, can you answer the question how much reputational risk you currently running, and can you do anything about it apart from toning down or completely exiting a certain activity.
I believe
Can you?
I believe you can, if you know what decisions can influence what areas. If you have scenarios. Uh, okay, I'm now talking as a, let's say, manager. I've been a director a couple of times in my life, so I'm talking from, let's say, managerial, not the risk management position. If you know what I mean. So if I know that some of my actions and decisions can influence, I have categories of risk. Like, let's say, in our company, we try to keep up a strong brand in terms of delivering, let's say, the quality products. Uh, and we know that, we need to check our consultants regularly if they follow some certain uh, procedures, and if their work is, based on processes, not the gut feeling. We we know what can happen if they, I don't know, overextend the certainty of what they say, trying to be more confident. There are different categories, different ways you can lose your face in a consulting business. Mm, but if I can measure it, I can uh, estimate the impact of making the wrong decisions, can't I?
Well, I think what you can measure is can or estimate. You can estimate the impact on directly on the client, as in you can assume that you lose a contract. But what is much
I
harder to
I
measure
can.
is how that
It's I can
how
I
that
can
contract how that bad decision actually impacts your brand with other.
It is harder, but there are, let's say, there is a research on the information spreading. So I can check how many connections on LinkedIn do people that I worked with have. I can check what is an average. I know that if the client is happy, he will tell on statistically to other people. If he's unhappy, he can tell it to six people. That's the average. And if you are working with customer service, you should know that it's more important to get rid of truly unhappy people than to keep happy people even happier. It's brutal. I'm sorry, but that's the numbers. So
Yeah,
I'm not
but you
saying
know
it's
this is
simple.
this is the problem with you data scientists, that you're having a beer, and you kind of wonder how many beers is too many, and before you know it, you go off and you build a model of spread of alcohol across your body. uh, any kind of business manager will have much bigger problems on their hands than trying to measure the spread of information across their network. So in that respect, I kind of have to tend to agree that measuring it is usually next to impossible in normal non-academic circles, without spending way than the budget you have available on trying to build a model across LinkedIn data sources. It's
I
it
I,
I
I think
think
you.
I think you should focus looking, because we want practical things, and we want our listeners to get some practical advice. I think that by all means, things like reputational risk, environmental, social risk, and even that poor governance, those should be considered. But they should be considered risks by all means. They are transverse risk, and everyone in every action that thing should be considered. But I think what's here is that training is a kind of risk mitigation
Mitigation.
strategy, right? It is actually talking about those risks, and making people aware about those is not just, oh, it's common sense, every they should do it anyway. It is something that is actually a very important activity that you should be doing as a manager, as a COO, as a CEO. Bring that to the forefront of the minds of your employees. And if you consider it slightly differently, depending on which risk you actually bring to the fore of the discussion in your company, you're shaping the way your teams, your people think. If you start bombarding your people with everyday discussion about social issues and how it impacts society, you pick this up as a number one point on your agenda, and you're really a company that's producing shovels. It's probably get your balance right. Whereas if you're a mining company, you should probably talk about environmental issues a lot, and not just lip service, as in yeah, we're talking about it, so we're the good guys, but actually make people think, okay, in your everyday job, how can you make actually our operation less environment heavy?
If I remember correctly, you mentioned that financial institutions tend to work on perception very much. The question is, isn't it a reputational risk management? But we are aligned with all the regulations. Okay, regulations are outdated. The lawmakers didn't notice the paradigm shift. I'm just wondering, because you want practical conclusions, like how much of the reputational risk is what you said, a lip service, like taking on your, what you measure for a average financial institution, having on the banners being compliant as sufficient protect them from the risk of losing face in the eyes of their potential clients, the people who realize that their actions actually lead to, I don't know, something undesirable, like losing
You're opening
savings
a Pandora's box here.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know you're trying to. That's your intention. It's well, first and foremost, regulations are there to affect a certain change, lead to a certain kind of
Status.
outcome, which regulations are made by people, and as with any policy, you and I know very well from our experiences that you may set up a policy within a company and you think you are aiming at a specific outcome. What you get is a completely different outcome, because people perceive your policy and then try to adapt to it. But they, being human, they always find a
Loopholes,
slightly different loopholes and
interpretations.
just their own interpretation. So
I thought that you will aim that, like, when it comes to regulation and being written by the people. I thought that it's like, who said that? What is Bismarck? Those who like sausage and respect the law shouldn't never learn how it's being made.
yes, that's very true. No, but I meant, if you can mistarget a policy so much, which is within a company, multiply it, square rooted, whatever, square it, not square root, and multiply it 1,000 times, and you get into regulation, because here you're not working in a single kind of pretty uniform environment of a company, but you're working as a policymaker across the whole market. So I do respect it that it must be very tough to enact a regulation in such a way that it actually does achieve a specific target. But you ask me whether the financial institutions actually meet regulations because it's good publicity, because they want to say we meet regulations, or they actually want to achieve a specific outcome. I think that it depends on the institution, but I want to broaden it. It's not only for financial institutions. Any regulated industry, oil, healthcare, and any industry where there are specific rules to be met. They may do it because they really believe that they should be doing the right thing, and in that case, they will. They may do two things. In fact, they may meet the regulations. They may also try to adapt the regulations to do it better, or they may pay lip service to it. Say, okay, yeah, we meet the regulations. This is the letter, maybe not the spirit, but the letter of the law. The law says that we should have a report on it. We have the report. We do nothing practical about it, but we have a report, so we're good.
No, it's now I'm just wondering how much of this effort, let's say, what again? Let's make you a CEO for a second of a big company, and let's say you really want.
I thought I was getting a promotion.
If it only would be in my domain to give it to you. Anyway, you are the CEO, okay, and you really want to follow the spirit of the law. I know, especially for our listeners in the States, there are countries where it's not the letter of the law that matters, but the spirit of the law. And if you go to court, if there is some suspicion that you broke the law, the judge will see if your actions are following the spirit of the law. Not in every country it's enough to have a good enough lawyer that will show that you followed the letter. Anyway, educational part over. So you are the CEO of the big company, and you really want to make a change. You really believe in ideals of making the world better. I met such CEOs myself. But what happens, and this is the risk, which I wonder if it can be quantified, by the way. I think it's this parallel risk, or however you call it. Oh, yes, this one. People below you, their KPIs are based on the profit they bring to the company this way or another. Like the lower you get, there is more and more layers of pressure on efficiency rather than on like how would you ensure that your people are allowed to make decisions which are right rather than optimal in terms of income.
I think it's a great question and a very big problem in companies. And again, you could say that it's really something that's not risk related because it's just training and good people management, which companies should do anyway. But I think it is a risk that needs to be considered because it does need to be managed. As a CEO, you need to give a certain tone from the top. You need to instill as a CEO, it's your job to instill a certain culture in the company. It very much depends on how you drive this culture, whether you're driving performance or whether you're driving proper outcomes. There's a lot of talk in kind of in various firms about not judging the kind of the working of a process by the intentions, by the outcome, which has its own problems because you're not always in control of the outcome. But it is. I'm trying to get to some kind of a point here that it's a culture, and it's a cultural risk within a company, which as a CEO you should be managing and start thinking about what message you're sending to your department heads, your kind of your C-suite members, how they actually should drive the culture of the company.
I
It is a risk because it can have negative outcomes. For example, there's some talk that certain big companies which have logistics teams, they are going through so many employees these days. People are leaving the company because of excessive pressure, low wages, that they are actually running out of possible workforce to hire anymore, because they've been through so many bodies that there are not really many bodies left. It's a risk.
It's a risk. No. What I'm thinking now, I have a devious thought. What we just said, you are CEO. You are trying to instill certain culture, which, let's say, is very much in alignment with care for environment. Okay. Now, there is a risk that this thought and this will be weakened before it gets to the shop floor. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it a governance risk? Does it justify putting G next to E and S? Doesn't have to any sane and working environmental social risk be considered in the light of governance risk, so factors which may impact the actual implementation of and execution of measures against the risks related to environment and social.
Again, you're going back to the ESG, and I think that the problem with ESG is that it's really undefined, and it's so broad, and yet when people talk about ESG, they almost always limit themselves to climate change. So
you create this gigantic bucket, and then you take a little cup, and you just say, "Yes, I am really caring about this bucket because I measured this little."
Pretty much. So it is. It's there's a whole bunch of risks out there that should be recognized, and just firstly, we shouldn't be following fads. We shouldn't saying, "Oh, we're managing ESG risk because it looks good on our brochure," and but actually do consider what those ESG mean, and then consider what it actually means for your company. If you're a software producer, your a software development company, your ESG will mean something completely different than if you're a financial institution. It will mean something completely different. You are an oil company. So it is. It's not a kind of a very precisely defined area, but I think it still needs to be managed as a risk because it requires a certain way of thinking. And if you don't consider,
so to be practical, let's say that we want to consider it as a risk, the environmental and societal. What are these elements? Let's try to get to something like, you are the CEO. What are the practical things? I hired my CRO. I'm just for people who just listen to us, I just pretended that
you're brushing your heads off the problem because you handed it to the CRO, right?
I made it somebody else's problem. That's one of our mottos. Let's.
No, it's not. Here you made, I think, the first mistake because hiring a CRO, I think, as a CEO, you didn't hand the problem to someone else. You've handed someone the kind of the keys to the lab to advise you on this whole area, but it's not like you've hired a scapegoat. If something goes wrong, you just say, "Oh, here's my CRO. if something goes wrong with risk, you lock him up. You don't lock me up. You lock.
So
And
what should I expect?
we talked
What should I
about
expect?
responsibility and accountability, right?
Unfortunately, yes, we have a podcast about it. I need to listen to it. It was a really good one. Okay, so I am a CEO. I hired the CRO. I gave him the keys. And what do I do now? What should I expect of him? How do I check if he's not
You
saying,
should
okay,
expect
we managed?
you should expect the CRO to understand very well the process that your company, the environment in which it operates, and then bring to you an agenda for managing the risks that apply to your company specifically, the environment in which it operates. And it may sound like a truism, but you did ask, so I'm trying to answer. What you should definitely not do is expect them to bring you good kind of sound bites for your marketing materials, right? What you should definitely not make them do is bend over backwards for any kind of fads that appear. Oh, I just read in an article today that ESG is a really big thing. We should definitely put ESG on the forefront of our risk management agenda. No, sorry, we already do that but we don't call it ESG. We call it, managing our pollution risk. Let's drop everything and call it our ESG. It depends on the CEO, right? We've seen both kinds, unfortunately,
yeah, but that's what I'm trying to because I'm thinking some of the CEOs who try to monitor, let's say, risk environment themselves, they might fall for this buzzword generating, like the risk world. What I'm trying to say is, from my limited experience, but feel free to correct me, the risk world is prone to generating buzzwords as any other. There is a risk of generating a buzzword. If it sounds cool, there will be hype.
But it's a marketing thing, right? And I'm not only talking about company marketing; it's also people marketing. I mean, you always complain to me that any semi-conscious person with a 5-hour course in Python can call themselves a data scientist these days.
Oh, they don't have to. They don't have to be semi-conscious.
Yeah. Same way, any person who read an article online can call themselves an ESG risk specialist because it's such a vague field, and start making podcasts about risk and how they become the ESG risk guru. Of course they can. The problem is that because it's if something is very vaguely defined, they will not bring real value to the company. They will bring buzzwords. Whereas the key here is to bring real value to either protect the company from adverse effects or improve the operation of the company in such a way that it doesn't actually damage the ESG, the environment, the society, or in this case, turning it around. They improve the governance in such a way that it has a positive impact on the world.
Talking about the transverse risks, one of the risks that in this discussion I seem to sense is that you hired your CRO, and now I like something that you said multiple times, is that the role of the risk is to enable and protect in this order. So I see the risk.
No, I always say protect and enable.
Do you?
I
hear it in a completely different
it
order.
halfway from me to you, it actually turns around. But Yes, I always say protect and enable, and I stick very much by this order
All right.
because
Okay, so be it. But there is an element of enable. Let's not get into
yes.
it. I don't think it's worth the time of anybody. That my hearing is selective. Mm, but there is a risk that this risk managers will get too protective, so to speak.
Mhm.
So you said that you are the CEO, you hired the CRO, he made his agenda, he comes back to you. What do you expect to see on this agenda to know that he is protecting and enabling? I know, because it's to serve and protect, I think. And that's maybe I don't
To serve
have
and
the
protect, but
reference.
that's US police, right? And
Yes, and that's maybe
risk is
what this second
yeah.
this protect
Uh,
is second.
Protect and enable. I think the key enabler from risk, because that's another discussion I had recently about online with some people about how some people think that risk should be driving profit. I sternly oppose. Risk should enable profit by firstly it should protect the business by pointing out where risks might lie and asking the right questions. I'm a big believer, a risk manager, of asking the right. I told you when we started cooperating that as a risk manager, I will ask you questions. I may not know the answers. I will ask you questions. If you have an answer, I may not always kind of understand the answer. I may not always agree with the answer, but the first thing I want to hear is that you have an answer, right? Because that means that you've considered it. That means that you've actually had a thought process. So that's kind of a protecting bit. Enabling is by actually freeing the resources that would otherwise be blocked by either over conservative, insurance taking and reserves that are excessive. Because as a science, risk management does can tell you how much insurance or reserve is necessary, but at the same time it tells you how much is enough. Secondly, by freeing you from the kind of uncertainty, you make a decision, let's take a step back. You're considering a decision. Risk management can tell you what risks lie in each of the kind of pathways you can take, and then it unblocks you by giving you the data, so you can consciously make the decision, justify it to yourself, to your stakeholders, to the law, if it's required, and then it does enable you to actually proceed. Analysis paralysis is a real risk, and it's a real thing.
Yeah, we noticed it in our history where we provided even, I don't know, predictive models, and the decisions were taken against it because that's the decisions that were always taken. So uh, people were so stuck in the way they analyze data that they didn't consider they didn't check their assumptions. We had a podcast about it, but no. So what should be on this agenda? So it can, now we understand what it does mean to protect and enable, but what should you expect to see on the agenda?
Uh, well, I
I
see
will
that
I will, I will
we've
go.
kind of
Yeah, we moved a little, but I think it's also a traversal
we've
risk
moved away
is
from transverse
paralysis.
risks and into general risk management. I'm very happy to kind of provide a pretty kind of short but I think general answer. The first step, as ISO and any school of risk management will tell you, is identification of risk. So specific, to your business, to your
But
organization.
but your CRO should bring it to you after first, I don't know, month of recognition.
Yeah, probably sooner. You should, and it's not something that they should bring to. It's something that they should create and evolve over time, because it's not a static thing. And this is very important. It should evolve with the company. It should always be questioned and reviewed, as any policy. And this is you know as well and I that with many of these artifacts, people think, oh, we've created a policy, we've created a document, it's now done. Let's move on with our life. And we try to explain to people that risk inventories, policies, governance, these are not destinations; they are journeys. And to use kind of an old adage, and they need to be kept alive. If you don't feed them, pet them once in a while, they will die. So it does need to a certain maintenance from time to time.
So
And
let's say they have this risk taxonomy, or however you want to call it. What else is on the agenda?
After risk taxonomy is the analysis of the risk, where it actually occurs, how it evolves, how it manifests itself, what the outcomes are, and then there follows the whole risk life cycle of risk evaluation, risk mitigation, and
so now coming back to I wanted to touch on the general risk management. Would in any way Transverse risk management differ?
No, I don't think so, because you need to identify it, you need to kind of analyze it, evaluate it, and the question is, how do you mitigate it, right? And I think ISO risk management definitions agree with me that exiting that particular activity or scaling it down is a viable strategy of risk management. Then yes, you need to manage it. You don't necessarily need to buy insurance against it if there isn't a market for reputational insurance. You don't necessarily need to kind of calculate VAR, because VAR is not a sine qua non requirement for any risk. It is a certain particular specificity of the risk that you have to manage it by considering really what reputational risks your business brings, different activities inside it, and then managing it accordingly.
So the lesson that I would take is, when you have your CRO, make sure that he's updating the risk. Which reminds me the discussion that we had on
paradigm shifts.
On paradigm shifts, yes, that they are really keen on checking if their assumptions are still holding against the reality.
Yes, and transverse risks are real risks, even though you should really watch out for fads like calling something, but you shouldn't stick to labels. Calling something ESG might be a label which is missing. Look behind the label and look at the actual risk that's affecting you.
Thank you, Artur, for sharing your experience.
Yeah, well, let's hope it was actually of use to anyone.
Thank you for listening. For those of you who would like to learn more about environmental, social, and governance issues, we sincerely recommend the Sustainable Minds podcast, exploring ESG and corporate brand. In each episode, they discuss how corporate purpose, vision, and values guide your behaviors, actions, and mindset, and how they drive ESG strategies and directions. You can find them on bcast.fm and other podcast platforms, and you will be able to find a link to them in the description of this episode.
Don't miss the next episode, where we'll be talking to Dr. Nick Swain, the president of the North Idaho College, about his experiences with data and risk in the context of managing a higher education institution.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or visit pedia.show to find out more about the future episodes and guests. You can also check out cognition.llc for more information on Cognition Shared Solutions, our services, and other events hosted by us.
For now, it's thank you from myself, Artur Guja, and my co-host, your friendly neighborhood data guy, Dr. Marian.
Goodbye.